Round of introductions. Paul?
Yes, I'm Paul Neville. I'm on the Outreach Committee.
Pierre Tong, bicycle planning.
Dwight Otwell, bicycle planning.
Mary Sal, Chair.
Elizabeth Alley, pedestrian planning.
Kelly, what about pedestrian committee?
Eric Land, city staff.
Paul Black, city staff.
So now we'll go to approval of minutes from the previous meeting.
Maybe I'm nitpicking, but just wanted to ask, Elizabeth, your comments about your trip to Germany were nice, and I'm glad it was captured here, but was the statement correctly reflected in the minutes about bicycle facility separation and dimensions?
Which page, please?
I'm sorry, this is the minutes from under
Page 8.
under new business, no, sorry, board comments, section 8. Ms. Alley was recently in Berlin, Germany, and
Looking for them right now.
What page are you on?
page
Page 8.
sorry, page 8.
Sorry.
It was a good comment. I just felt that it was unclear how it was captured. I wanted to see if you had an opportunity to improve on that for the minutes. That was all I'd seen that might be worth talking about.
Vertical separation and dimension.
I feel like that's the heart of what you were saying, kind of.
Yeah, close enough.
Okay, fine. Then
It worked well when
I
they were
have-
wide enough.
I
How
have
about
no
that?
issue. There you go.
It worked
Okay.
extremely poorly when they weren't.
Any other comments or feedback on the minutes? Otherwise, can we get a motion to approve them?
So moved.
And I will second.
All right. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to provide public comment? I don't see
Oh,
anybody.
You need to vote first.
Um,
Then do comment.
What?
Vote first on the minutes.
Oh,
All in favor, say aye.
all in favor, say aye. Sorry, guys, I'm gonna mess this up so bad tonight.
Aye.
Okay. Now, is there anybody who'd like to provide public comment? All right. Do I have to do anything official now after that?
No, ma'am?
Okay. Let's move on to staff reports then.
Good evening. Not much on our end at this point this evening. The one thing I want to update the commission on is that the city council at their last meeting approved the amended work plan, and I believe everyone should have received a copy of the amended version. The council made, I think, one edit to the draft work plan that you adopted at your last meeting with the revisions, and you should have received a copy of that. So if you've got any questions, we'll proceed forward. Bike share update. So we are in installation now of the final 5 stations. And just for everyone's reference, the last 5 stations are the ones that required the most hardscape work, all the concrete pads that are going in. In the case of the one of the stations with the state government property, we're still negotiating a right of entry to finalize that. And so once we have that done, then we'll have our contractor working there. But the site work was being done today at the Museum of Art station. So that concrete pad is going in. And we anticipate with the concrete work, it takes about 7 days for concrete curing before we can start doing work and installation on the pad. And it has to pass a 28-day curing test before they can be formally accepted. So there's still a bit of lag time with these. But we are close to the finish line on phase 1. We are fielding inquiries from folks about what we're going to be doing for phase 2. And we're talking through what our investment strategy is going to look like versus working with private development. We've been approached by a number of private development interests that are very keen on seeing bike share stations included as part of development plans. And anytime we have a chance to partner in that sense and to be able to site stations in a way that's going to be advantageous to us in the system development, we'll take advantage of that.
So I just have a quick question on that. So you guys had a proposed phase 2 network that was preliminarily when you went into the feasibility study of bike share. Is that what you will be using as your network, or are you going to be flexible with how you know what I mean, deploy
We're going to revisit that because obviously, that plan was developed 5 years ago and the city has changed a lot in 5 years.
Right.
And so we're going to revisit that, and as well as looking at that with the lens of where we've been approached by private development interest and seeing where those overlap.
Okay,
But we'll be bringing that back to the commission as we start
Yeah,
to develop
okay.
phase 2 strategy.
cool.
And then projects, I'll be happy to answer any questions about any pending projects. Some of you may have seen some of the work that's going on right now with the Blunt Person Wake Forest implementation. I did have an email, the commission received an email from former BPAC Chair Alan Wiggs today regarding Wake Forest Road. I asked him for a clarification, and his confusion was that he was sending out a proposed cross-section for the section of Wake Forest Road, but adjacent to Mordecai. And right now, if you've seen it, it has a fairly wide center turn lane and one lane each direction, but does not yet have the bike lane infrastructure installed. That'll go in as part of the resurfacing. So right now, the milling has gone and taken it down to the base. When the new coat of asphalt goes in, that's when the final marking plan will be done, and that'll include the bike lanes.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Is it gonna go to one lane?
It's going to remain one lane in each direction.
Okay.
That is the final pattern. So there's a little bit of transition issues right now because of the fact that we have not yet installed any of the on-street parking on the west side of Person Street. So as of right now, northbound traffic on Person has 3 lanes, and then a course of about a quarter mile between Delway and Glasscock, it goes from 3 lanes down to 1. So that'll be abated once the on-street parking goes in and the new pattern goes in south of Delway on Persons. There'll be 2 lanes that merge into 1. So there are some congestion issues right now. Some of that's normal in terms of transition pattern for changing the street and interjecting a lane drop, but we expect that to abate.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's the rough traffic, but the traffic that I've experienced has slowed down significantly, so, well done.
Yes.
Feels a lot safer already.
And there's also, I think, there's the big, people are dipping down, and so they're slowing down a lot to go to the transition and pavement, so.
But all it
But,
takes is
you
one
know.
person going the speed limit and everybody behind you
I know,
has to go the speed limit too.
So Alan's email said north of Capitol. Was that a
Right.
typo on
I
his
believe it
account?
was.
Okay.
Right, so that,
I wanted clarification on that as well. There were specific comments on this project in past years about the treatment underneath the Beltline Bridge at that point on Wake Forest, right?
the transition.
Correct.
Wait, let's make sure we're talking about the right corridor. So which part of Wake Forest Road are you referring to?
Need verification on which
So,
section
yeah,
he
perhaps
was
if you
talking
just
about.
get clarification in that from internally, and then I know we're not supposed to conduct, commission business via email, so we wouldn't have this conversation there, but if you could get clarification from him on what segment he was referring to, and then we could better respond, because I was confused about that too. I thought he was referring north of Capitol, where, over by like loading dock and stuff.
Right, so he did write me back today and said he was talking about the section through Mordecai.
I see.
He had seen the stuff go in, and he was concerned there was no bike lanes.
Right, he was said, why is there a 24-foot wide median out here?
Okay,
I stand corrected. I was confusing it further north up as it goes up under the Beltline, which is not being discussed here.
For the record, I like north of Capitol for Wake
I was
Forest. We
gonna
could do
say.
that there too.
yeah, totally. Thank you.
Are there any other projects anyone has any questions about?
I guess Gorman Street, I'm
I
kind
was
of
going to
curious.
plug Gorman Street. We got the construction authorization that we were waiting for from NCDOT, and it is on schedule. We expect to go to, looking at the website, advertise for construction bids this fall. So that's pending if Chad, our project manager, hasn't put it out yet. And we think we'll be awarding a construction contract in the spring.
So this fall and this spring? Okay. Okay. Let's move on to Chair's report. Oh my gosh, that's me. Well, I have attended some of the subcommittee meetings this month. However, a few of them got rearranged. So I've attended the bike subcommittee meeting just now.
Excuse me 1 second.
Oh, absolutely.
Are the large print copies available?
Is it?
The agenda in
Good
there?
question.
Well, I promised I would be given those,
Did somebody snag it?
I can make sure to say everything out loud if you have any questions. I'm not sure if maybe it didn't get printed this time.
It does not appear to, I apologize.
Mr. Lamb promised me.
Well, you know, we already went through a lot of the text as far as the looking at the approval of minutes and everything. The rest will be kind of visual maps that might be.
Oh, is that the way it is? Okay.
You're not buying any of my excuses, are you? So I only
I
attended.
love you anyway.
I only attended the bike subcommittee meeting, which was a very productive meeting. I will let Dwight provide that update, though, and we'll move right along to the bicycle planning committee update.
So from our last meeting a month ago, we worked on the work plan and got that pushed out and brought to council, and
Yeah.
so done. So what we just did in the hour previous to this is we met with Mila and the engineers from WSP and Tool Design and went over a bunch of the options for the bus rapid transit corridors, in where the corridors might go and in different options for the types of facilities that could go in. And one thing to note, there were some really great improvements, I think, especially on the Martin Street section, where before it was going to be a mostly one-way kind of barrier, what we looked at, and now they've given us a bunch of options for different separated bike facilities on that corridor. We'll have a full report next month and maybe some graphics for you.
It'll be an iterative process, but I think it will provide a platform for us to engage more interactively.
Great, looking forward to it.
And community outreach, Rebecca is not here, and I know that y'all didn't have an opportunity to meet this month, so continue on.
I can add a comment, though. We did not meet, however, there was comments in the minutes about setting up a Walktober event with the Oakwood Cemetery. Rebecca has gotten confirmation and support from Robin Simonton, who's the executive director of the cemetery. We're working on setting up the Walktober event there Sunday, October 27th, which is the last Sunday in October. Time is still being determined on whether it's going to be a sunset walk or a walk after dark or something like that. But that's in addition to the discussion we had about Walktober last time. I wanted to bring it up in the committee report.
Okay. Did we also want to see if there are specific commissioners that were, I'm not sure if maybe that would be an old business item or if we should discuss it now? If there are commissioners that wanted to help be facilitators for some of these events? Typically,
It's not on the agenda, but it fits in the committee report. So I believe that Rebecca had already volunteered to be a representative at that one. I have always
Okay.
gone to that one myself.
Okay.
What were the other two that needed to be covered?
Do we have access to that? Can you pull up the email chain so that we can see there were a few other events that were referenced? I apologize. I think Rebecca had been the lead on it, but
There's a walk to school referenced in the minutes
right.
on October 2nd, but that's not a Walktober event.
B had put together a list of like 4 or 5 events. And
Can I find it
yeah.
quickly?
Yeah, and I think ultimately this, for me gets down to, we need to kind of decide from a commission level where we want to put, the bandwidth into this. And, that's something I think over the next year we can really hone in on. But I know there's been a desire to make Walktober more of a oomph event. So that will require the commissioners, I think, to step up and to assist with that, though, because this has always been a commission-led initiative. So I think that, we can also provide feedback to staff that we'd like to see, an equal amount of staff time put into as Bike Month, I think, is the consistent kind of dialogue that's happening there. But I think this year this is a pretty minimal Walktober effort. So I think that I don't even know, for instance, if we'll have will we have a poster, you think, put together?
We have posters in development now, yes.
Okay, great.
So may I suggest that be covered in the either new business or the committee meeting and reported back?
Okay, perfect.
You said the walk was October the 22nd.
No, sir, 27th, which is
Oh, the
last Sunday.
27th?
Mhm.
Okay, and where will it take place?
That's the Oakwood Cemetery.
Okay, okay, of what's in.
So you think we should discuss this under old business if we need to firm up anything with Walktober versus,
I can go find a copy of the poster upstairs real quick.
okay. And then the pedestrian planning committee?
We did not meet this month. The prior month, we met with Jason to discuss the prioritization for streetscapes, which we'll be reviewing as a full committee this time. And I guess next month, we need to pick something from our now approved work plan to get started on. Maybe we can look at intersection details. The other one was looking at the streets manual. So I think that's going to involve some staff resources to come and talk through where we are on that,
Okay,
where our recommendations have landed.
wonderful. All right, so I think we're ready then to get an update from Jason on the streetscape projects and prioritization.
We don't have the agenda up here, do we? Okay, well, that's no problem. Just bear with me for a second while I pull up the agenda, which I will point to. Actually, I need to be over here. I apologize that last month I was unable to be here, and I know that they provided you with some of the materials, and we posted them to the website, made a couple edits before we put it into this material. I'm going to go right to the map. There's a memo in the agenda packet materials that explain a little bit about where we are. It is similar to what we discussed at the Pedestrian Planning Committee. Let's focus a little bit on a couple of those changes and tweaks that we made. Actually, before I go to the map, I'm going to read those off to you all. Excuse me. Because of the Blue Ridge Road project that NCDOT is doing with the grade separation of North Carolina Railroad and Hillsborough Street, there's a section of that streetscape project that's effectively going to be completed by our contribution to that project. So deleted those from there. We changed the name of Boylan Avenue Part 1 and Boylan Avenue Part 2 to South Boylan and North Boylan to be more reflective of the actual street names and our geography, just a simple little change. There was a project in there from Clark Avenue that was shown kind of east into the edge of Glenwood South, and in reviewing the small area plan that put that into there, we realized that that really needed to be further west and in the area from Brooks Avenue down to Oberlin. So that change was made. We just kicked around the idea of whether the different streets in 5 Points were separate or not, and at this point, they're both. That could be something that you might give us feedback on. It might be something that as we score it and we think about what they cost, we might decide that some part of that's more important than others, or that we should just score it and therefore rank it as one. And then we also looking at Martin, Hargett, and Lenore in East Raleigh all being on the prioritization because of a former project of basically East Raleigh streetscapes or old East Raleigh streetscapes, decided that Davie may not be quite as solid of alignment with those because there's less mixed-use zoning, but we would let the prioritization make that determination for us, and that we should at least put it in and score it. And then there was an error that a section of North Blunt Street between Peace and Delway was not on there. It's been added to the Person Street Business District. So in the agenda backup, there's a list of all of the projects, the scoring criteria, which has not changed, and we can get into details about that if it's appropriate. And then this map shows, I'm going to zoom out just a tiny bit. I think, nope. Try to get this to a full screen. Control L. This is the projects that are not downtown. And the reason the ones that are not influenced by potential BRT, part of the reason why we can't necessarily show them on a map is because if downtown operations considerations from Bus Rapid Transit changes what's possible from a to from extent. It's hard to show and to be determined on a map. So rather than show some of those that we knew and some of those that we didn't, I put only the ones that we had a clear scope for on there.
So a large print map would have helped me anyway.
Can you see this okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
So my intention is to, if the commission wishes, to finish scoring these projects and to bring those technical scores to the commission at your next meeting, 4 weeks from now or 5 weeks from now. And that information should allow the commission to, and it'll be in the agenda material before that, it's not last minute thing either. That should allow the commission to decide what it thinks, what you guys all think the highest priority set of projects are, whether the technical score is the only thing that we should consider, or if there's something that you are hearing from the community to basically advise city council. And then I think our plan is to take that recommendation to city council as a part of your report. And if they adopt it, then that would be the city's adopted streetscape, prioritization. Any other questions? Did I cover what was necessary? I'm not sure if I didn't want to overlap with what had been discussed last month.
So I have a few questions. As looking at the feasibility of these and the costs associated, do we have separate, can you break down our funding mechanisms for streetscaping and how many could be done hypothetically per year or per 5-year cycle, or however, what metric we'd be looking at?
It's a difficult question. It depends on which one of these you do and how much you try to accomplish with that.
Sure.
So for instance, if I was to take project 24, which is Hillsborough Phase 4, a project I have a little bit of familiarity with. That's from Oberlin Road to Morgan Street. That was in the original streetscape prioritization 2013, along with all the other sections of Hillsborough that have not yet been completed. You can see the gap between 24 and 23 on this map, where we've done Phase 1 and Phase 2. Phase 1 and Phase 2 were tens of millions of dollars each. Eric probably knows the quantity for each of those. And part of what drove up the cost of those, amongst many other things, was burial of the utility lines. There are overground utility lines in this section of Hillsborough Street. And if we wanted to bury those utility lines, we'd probably use up every bit of the funding we've identified at this point in the 2017 transportation bond, and then maybe some after that. If this project is a couple of small intersection interventions near Ash or Park Avenue, where there's some challenges, and maybe is a median refuge somewhere else, then that's probably not that expensive a project. And we have, at this point, $4 million from the transportation bond for this program. Some of that money is going to need to be used to finish Oberlin Road Streetscape Project and the P Street Streetscape Project that are both nearing construction right now. Those construction costs have gone up, and we're sure that we're going to need to use some of that money. Whether we need to use a lot of that money or half of that money, maybe a little bit of that money, but probably closer to half of that money, is still to be determined. So a smaller scale project, maybe $400,000, I think. Does that seem appropriate for some of these, Eric and Paul?
Yeah.
If we start promising things like utility burial and moving curb lines, then we're talking about millions and millions and millions of dollars, of which we don't have the funding for. So what this can do is, if we want to do that with one of these projects, that's really what the scope of these ask for, then it becomes a question of, is it something that comes through the next transportation bond as a standalone project, rather than be a minor program funded initiative.
Because I'm struggling looking at the prioritization of this and seeing it's hard to conceptualize and to allocate, because we're looking at Avant Ferry as 1 through 5. So that's saying,
Well,
or
this is
am I
not the
understanding that
scoring.
correctly?
This is not the scoring.
Okay,
This
so
is
what, is it
roughly
just an
alphabetical.
arbitrary number placed
Right.
next
Just
to?
an index.
So,
Right.
and then this scoring matrix would be placed upon these in order to provide that
Yes,
scoring?
what you were looking at, and,
Okay.
and I flipped over to page 1 and page 2 of the project
Okay.
lists are here. Yeah, it's just 2 pages. This shows what the scope of the project is, where the project came from, whether it was on the list in 2013 when we prioritized it, or whether it was added because it's in a corridor plan or an area
Gotcha.
plan. And then something about the scope. Most of what these say is either implement the corridor plan,
Right.
or pedestrian safety, transit access, bicycle, and aesthetic improvements, which is a bit of a catch-all, but it's not landscaping, and it doesn't say anything about burying utility lines, partly because I don't think we can promise to do that with the funding we have. It may come up, it may be something that is asked of this program, but at this point, it's more than we have funding for.
So again, with what was held at the table last time was twofold. One was the prioritization methodology, and the other was the universe of projects. So we get all the projects in the bucket. One thing we do need your feedback on is the idea of combining 15, 16, and 17 into a single project, and that would just be a 5-point streetscape project. We felt like that would be geographically appropriate rather than splitting those up into separate projects.
Do you have any thoughts or feedback?
On 15, 16, 17, I think, generally it does make sense because the function of those roads is so intertwined.
Yeah.
That if you wanted to make meaningful improvements to the pedestrian realm, like doing things like bump outs or losing a lane or shifting a turn lane or things like that, it has impact on all the directly adjacent streets.
Yeah.
Would combining them increase their score because you get to take different components of different projects and get higher scores?
Maybe a tiny bit. It's also going to increase the cost significantly. Not that we're able to cost estimate these at this point to be able to know what that is. So one of the things that would make a certain amount of sense if we had the resource to do it would be to have a very, very clear scope and a clear cost estimation methodology for each of these and be able to do kind of a cost benefit at the end of it. We don't have good enough cost information, nor do we necessarily know how each of these would end up being planned out to do that. I'm thinking about how in the methodology, and I'll flip over to those. The transit score for those is going to be the same. The vehicle volume is going to be very different. So I don't know if we would average that to the average vehicle volume of those 3 streets, or whether we take the highest, which is Glenwood Avenue. Since they all intersected, I think maybe taking the highest makes the most sense. The pedestrian lane heat map is, I think, effectively the same in all of those. The bikeway integration, I don't think that's a project where through a streetscape project we could integrate a bikeway implementation into that. So I don't think we're giving points to that. The zoning districts are effectively the same. It's not in the comp plan, so those sorts of projects are not getting those points. And I don't believe it's in the economic development target area, excuse me. And the community vulnerability for that part of town is pretty low, though I don't know exactly how low.
So I'm seeing that, excuse me, 3 things have to happen. First, this is saying this is the draft methodology. I just want to know if we have a green light and the BPAC has said, yay, go ahead with this scoring mechanism. That's the first thing. Once that is passed, then you're asking us to give recommendations on the list of items here, if any of them need to be changed or combined. And
Correct.
then 3, the go ahead to use the rating system to rate these, and we take it to the next step.
Well, and that's the question. I mean, you have the option, if you're comfortable with the methodology and the draft list of projects, the 2 choices are, if you're happy with these, then you could adopt them tonight. They would move on to the next potential city council meeting, and we would rank them on the way to the city council, or we could hold it here, go through and apply the ranking, and then bring the ranked projects back to you at your next meeting.
Either way, I think it's important that we all agree and bring forward a motion and pass it that the methodology is, we approve of the methodology. That, I didn't want to forget that first step.
Right.
Yeah.
I think what's most important is that we make sure our indicators on our methodology are sound so that we don't, ultimately, I think that that should stand by itself to weight these in a way that would be both equitable and, all these variables that if it came back to us and then we provided our own subjective view on to say what we thought should be prioritized, I think then we might all of a sudden be like, oh, I just think that this is the better way to
Yeah.
holistically
That's why
approach
we're
it.
not showing you scores partly.
I appreciate
Wanted your
that.
unbiased feedback first.
There was one, the one thing that we did add as a result of the pedestrian committee input was a factor for equity, and we discussed that at our previous meeting. So we haven't seen how that impacts scoring change.
Sure,
I
sure.
don't think we've seen that yet. So I would be curious to know whether or not it has meaningful impact on this list.
Sure.
But I can understand also the temptation to want to tweak it until we get to what we feel subjectively is right.
Right,
But,
I
mean, I
wouldn't.
think the methodology is right. Whether the weighting is right, I don't know.
right.
I would add that our exercise of scoring these points for each of these projects is not ranking them, it's scoring them.
Scoring.
If you want to
Correct.
pass on the score to
Rank.
city council and say that is the rank we want, then that can be your recommendation.
rank, but
And you
yeah.
could do that today, as Eric suggested, or you could look at the scores, have some idea of what the scope and how it ties to other projects and what what you hear from the community and say, we think these are the top projects. Now, hopefully they're the ones that score near the top, but not necessarily in order, only the top couple.
The other difficulty I'm having too is we don't have a mechanism to account for cost, right? And so if we are looking at one project that's going to tie up funds for 5 years, hypothetically,
Or,
right, that's the depressing truth. And so I would like we have obviously a lot of need for these types of projects in our city. So how can we be thinking about like that light, quick, cheap approach even to streetscaping, right? Like what kind of incremental improvements can we be doing? And that's a broader conversation. But
I would use the Avon Ferry Corridor study as an example, and I'm going to go to that section, partly because they're the top 5 projects in a somewhat alphabetical order. It goes Avon Ferry, Blue Ridge, and then geographically kind of around. Part of this is a function of how the old list was numbered and then lining up new projects with old projects. But on Avon Ferry, the number 1 project going north to south is Western to Varsity. That's a major project that involves right-of-way acquisition and moving curbs and things. But other sections of this, particularly Gorman to Athens, is really a small modification with potentially putting could be done at least partly through restriping. There is then a longer term, deeper project that could involve some heavier construction. And if you look at the Avon Ferry Corridor study, you can see that thinking in there a little bit. So we're identifying the place and identifying that it's high priority to do something there, but we're going to do what we're capable of doing with the funding of those higher priority projects. And if the answer to that is nothing, then we'll be looking for another way to fund that as soon as possible, which may be the next transportation bond, and it may be, further on.
Yeah, we're starting to get into techniques of triage at this point, right? That there's no way that all of these projects are going to get built
Right.
anytime soon.
Right.
With the amount of funding that is dedicated to it. And so you do have to be strategic, and, there's lots of ways to slice and dice. And I hear what you're saying about wanting cost estimates, but because these projects are so long in scope and the list is long, that construction costs are going to change, circumstances will change, the
Right.
development community will take care of things, traffic patterns will change.
sure.
Best practices will change, right?
Right.
That we weren't putting
Totally.
in buffered bike lanes in any of these places 10
Right.
years ago, so.
And again, the
It's-
option always remains that if one of these projects, like the number 1, ID number 1 project, comes in and that's a $5-6 million project, to reiterate what Jason said, we still have the opportunity to fund that as a standalone project in the capital improvement program. We can look at seeking outside funds through the MPO and supplement our local funds with that. So we're intentional in terms of not showing costs at this point, because we really
Yeah.
want to try and capture what are the highest priority projects.
Great.
Well, now, I seem to remember that the Rapid Transit project had an estimated timetable. If, is there at least an estimated timetable for the top 5 projects, and does Rapid Transit affect that?
It will affect some of these projects, but not universally. BRT has like 4 different corridors that it would impact, and you said you already removed those projects from.
You'll notice on
because
the
of the
list
impact.
here, it takes you to get down to 12 and 13 before you see this written in there, on hold for BRT implementation.
Oh,
We don't
So-
know the priority
Okay.
yet until we rank them, so
Right.
we
Well,
can't answer the question until we
okay.
rank them.
That's
I think
true.
one big difference is how the funding streams for BRT versus this. BRT has a steady funding stream, and these largely depend on successful bond initiatives. Is that
Right.
correct?
yeah, what I'm wondering is, we're talking about money, this has been submitted as a work plan, right? Am I right? The top 5 at least?
Well, no,
have-
it's, the work plan is more broad in scope
Okay.
than that. Yeah.
I don't know, I mean, what my impression is this seems to be, well, we'll see if we have the money, if they're done at all. It just seems like there'd be some, I don't know where we can have some leverage, but, well, of course, we are advisors. Okay, I get that.
Show me the money.
That's what's said,
You heard
but, yeah, but I don't know. I mean, it seems like we have these great plans and everything, but no estimate really, or no money,
Well, again, we do
at
have,
least right now.
we do have funds that are set aside as part of the 2017 transportation bond.
All right.
There was $4 million set aside as part of that. So the top project that comes into this could use some of that money. And if it's more than a couple of $1 million, then that money can still be used to start the design of the project. And we can look at funding the full construction of that project through other means. But again,
So there is money allocated toward it.
towards streetscapes, yes,
On a
that's
rolling
correct.
The program,
basis, yeah.
yes.
Oh,
$4
really?
million from the 2017 transportation bond, of
Okay.
which, some of which is spoken
Okay.
for projects that are about to go to construction. But we don't know how much yet. One of those hasn't been bid and the other one.
I'm on
I
a
think
learning
maybe
curve,
rebid.
Jason, but
Yeah.
thank you, sir.
Well, that's okay.
I have kind of an unconventional thought. I wonder if there are ways to pilot like a tactical urbanism approach where we would put trees in big planters and start to move them along these corridors. And then we could use that street tree that's portable to create a better ambiance while we're waiting for these. I just wonder what the cost would be to have 40 trees that we moved around the city, that we could start to simulate some of these improvements if we do have the right-of-way in place already. And maybe if we have some incremental amount of money left over from the streetscaping projects after we utilize overages, we could be thinking about unconventional approaches that could allow us to see immediate benefits. Just a thought.
It's just going to depend upon the project. It's all about the context.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh.
Does it make sense to, as BPAC makes a recommendation for a set of priority projects, to basically take scores and take a list of those and kind of ask for, maybe we need to do a little bit more planning on what those highest ranking or highest scoring projects are before you can really make a recommendation about scoring. So I think I'm comfortable, after we finish the scores and show you the scores, and there's a set of those that you want more information about, to talk more about what seems possible and what would a certain amount of money buy us on these corridors. And then we might be able to adopt more clearly what we think those projects are, rather than just a list of streets in order. There's only so far we can take that. We're not going to have a cost estimate that is super precise, but it can be an order of magnitude and some clarity about what that scope is, so that some person sees that their street's on the list and they're expecting, gold pavers. And then
Or
they
just
end up,
before they die, they want their streetscape.
right, and then they end up getting stamped asphalt, and they're disappointed because they were expecting something that we really
Right.
couldn't deliver. We might be able to be a little more clear about that. And that might help us identify if there's a tactical urbanism approach that's appropriate in some of these corridors, and
Just,
to make that explicit.
Thinking. How do we all feel about the scoring
I
itself?
was going to make a motion that the BPAC endorse the streetscape scoring methodology and direct staff to rank the wish list that we have in front of us.
So let me make a suggestion. Let me suggest that you hold off on making a formal motion to endorse this, because I think we want to leave the door open in case there's any tweaks when we bring the scoring back, so that you don't have to reconsider the item. And as long as we got sort of general agreement from the commission in the general direction, we can take that and go forward with that. Would that be okay?
Makes sense, yeah.
Okay.
All right.
So
Thank
no
you.
motion, but you're going to bring back some more information.
We will score this set of projects on this criteria and bring it back to you at your next meeting.
We appreciate your
And
time.
For,
fix the typo I found and the one Eric found too.
yeah, for the projects that are,
Paul was gonna find it if you didn't, so.
we appreciate the attention to detail. On the projects that are flagged with the BRT conflict, do you want us to go ahead and score those, or do you want us to pull those projects out from consideration?
Because they will be implemented with the BRT corridors as the
In
BRT
some cases, they
corridors come
could
online?
be.
Really?
Potential. It's
Right.
a
Okay,
potential
so then-
conflict.
I'd like you to, I'm
Okay.
curious.
Score
I
them.
don't know that we're gonna be able to do that because, for instance, if the comp plan says, and I'm gonna make an example here of, where did it go? West Cabarrus Street. I don't know the to or the from. I mean, the comp plan in 2000, the livable streets plan in 2003 made a recommendation, but BRT would potentially put a monkey wrench into what the to and the from is, and the to and the from has a lot of implications to the scoring.
Sure.
So
Okay.
I think it's going to be difficult to score most of the ones that are on hold for BRT
Okay.
until some of that BRT planning sets what's possible. Other ones of them, it could be possible, and if we want to keep it kind of consistent, I'd rather just,
I think it would
exclude
be
them.
super useful if it's not too time-consuming to have your insights on what impact BRT could have to these projects that are noted in the comp plan. Understanding that they
Right.
wouldn't be able to get a score, but kind of, I'd like to see your take on
Right.
what it means for those streets.
Just like we've seen with the bike rally plan in the downtown, you know, it does have implications, and we just want to understand those trade-offs preemptively so we can discuss them and work through them.
Very good.
Cool. All right, well, thanks a lot for that information. Anything else? We appreciate it. Okay.
Thank you.
does anything I should leave this to?
Yeah, leave it up, please.
All right, now, Paul, you're going to discuss the resurfacing?
Yeah, welcome to the Paul Show. I've got the next 3 items. In fact, while I'm getting set up here, I'm going to pass those around.
Thanks, sir.
I think we're going to pull it up on that presentation here.
All right, so going over the 2019 resurfacing program that we had 5 new projects get put on the ground, and we had one that was an existing project where we updated the pavement markings. That was North Hills. If you read through, we've got the eastern part of Country Trail, part of Kaplan, and part of Triangle Town, and we had O'Neill and Corporate Center that were actually held over from 2018. And you can sort of see them on the map. Again, you can see geographically they are spread out around the city. So are there any questions about those? It was really rather quiet this year. I think the biggest thing we talked about was North Hills, if there were ways to tinker with what was there. At least in the bike committee, there was worry that it would end up like Glen Eden, where we spent a lot of energy and ended up at the same place that we started. So what we did was we just looked at what was there, replaced the pavement markings in the same configuration, although we did make some improvements. Places where right now, or initially there were only white lines, we went through and we would gore out or stripe out some of the areas where nothing went, make it a little less confusing for both drivers and bicyclists.
Why were 2 held over for 2018? Do you know?
Ran out of money.
Okay.
They were deferred as part of the resurfacing program, so the commission had seen them previously.
Okay.
So on to the next part, if there are no questions. 2020, we actually had a very, very large candidate list. We've reviewed that against the priority bike plan and the bike plan in general. There are some projects that we might recommend including if possible. Again, because it's a candidate list that will be winnowed down to probably half of what it was. There are a few we might talk about postponing just because when you look at them all together holistically, kind of like what you saw with 5 points, holistically, sometimes those projects make more sense to move together, and we might need a little extra time to deal with that, but get a better product or a cheaper product or both at the end of the process. Street maintenance is going to finalize the list in late autumn, early winter, and we'll come back to you with a final candidate list of streets and potential bike projects in late winter.
Can I ask a maybe out of left field question about this? I recall when we were talking about sidewalks in the Roanoke Park vicinity recently, we ended up recommending something on street. And So I don't know if these resurfacings are on major streets where having a pedestrian walkway inside the curb would be not advised. But it would be useful for me to know, as we look at that ranking list, which of the streets have sidewalks. And that doesn't mean it could just end there. Or if there are places where we have excess asphalt, where there might be an opportunity for like a mixed-use path in street with vertical delineation.
So the resurfacing program that the city handles covers all city-maintained streets.
Okay, so major and minor. Great.
The ones that NCDOT does are generally major roads, but there are some small holdover residential subdivisions that they still maintain the streets for in certain cases.
Okay, great.
When you reference postponing a project, that would be you proposing to them to postpone the entire project entirety or just the bike installation of a repaving? Like, would it proceed forward with the repaving without a bike facility?
No, we were actually saying to hold off on the repaving. Again, if this is a giant candidate list, there might be potential streets. And I can tell you that we were looking at St. Mary's and Glenwood and Boylan were all, parts of them were all on the list.
Right.
And when you look at them holistically, sort of what we'd have to do in terms of closing things and coordinating things and potentially some other things going on Glenwood in particular, we said, hey, if we back up a minute and take a little extra time and look at what can we do while this is happening. There may also be some other departments with other issues like stormwater or utilities. Can we go in and do something that's more holistic?
Okay.
And there
Because
were
they
a
would
few
never
opportunities.
proceed forward with the repaving something without installing a bicycle facility if that was recommended by the Bike Raleigh plan, right? If you guys would never say, hold off on installation, and they wouldn't proceed forward with paving, right, without a bike facility.
There
Is that
can be
correct?
cases where there would. So for example, let's say the overall strategy was to do a two-way facility on one side of the street, but the
Right.
resurfacing was only covering a short segment.
Right.
You know, to do a short segment of application that's out of context from the rest of any continuity, we might forego something like that in that case. What we would do is to work with our field services folks and our traffic engineering staff to design it in a way that wouldn't preclude us from coming back and adding those markings at a later date.
Okay, because like P Street calls for an above curb separated bike facility, but the NCDOT project will only be putting in bike lanes.
Correct.
So that would be kind of an example of that, right? I mean, it's different because it's still
Yes.
proceeding forward
Right.
with something.
That's right. And there are cases where we've made determinations that it's advantageous for us to go ahead and go forward with some type of in-street facility as an interim measure, even if there's a behind-the-curb recommendation in the master plan.
Okay,
Yeah, and I should caveat that the list we're looking at is just the city part. It does not include the NCDOT resurfacings.
okay. And that's not anything we have purview over, correct?
They share that with us, and we give them feedback, and we have been able to fit bike lanes on some of the facilities.
Okay,
It's trickier because when they move projects around in schedule, we don't always have a
Right.
timely way to get back to them, but if the ones that they do share with us, we've had some success.
right. Morgan Street was one of those, right? Yeah, okay, cool, thanks.
I want to thank you for bringing this in and putting the schedule in front of us for 2020. I think the time frame is right, that we will be able to have good input for the process this year. I realize this past year there were some hiccups and there was also not that many projects, but looking at what is on the 2019 list, we probably could have had some constructive input that would have helped that decision. So thank you for doing it for next year, and let's keep on the schedule so we can help give you good guidance.
All right, so if there are no further questions, we can keep moving.
You had-
Hunting on your bicycle?
You had, and earlier in the meeting, you had deferred the Walktober conversation, you said to old business. Do you want to cover that now, or?
Let's get through your presentations, or we have to go to stay on old
Nope,
business.
Totally fine. You can table
Okay.
that further. That's fine.
Yeah,
Either way is good with me.
keep rolling.
So an update on the State Street and so if you know the priority bike plan, State Street is S1. It is the top priority separated bike facility in the plan. And N1 is actually a combination of streets in the Biltmore Hills area that includes Dandridge. Dandridge connects directly to State Street, and together they make a system that would link all the way up to existing bike lanes on Crosslink Road. So I'll zip through. I presented at the South Citizens Advisory Council last Monday, before today. A week from today, I've got another one with
Recently.
South Central. Correct. So basically, we went out and just said, we want to make sure that everybody's still okay with what's in the plan, and we want to hear feedback sort of before we even start doing anything. We got a few comment cards back, but mostly we received a positive reception, or at least not a negative one, which is okay sometimes. We talked about all ages and abilities and why we were pursuing these kinds of facilities in particular. We gave a quick visualization of what it might look like. That was very quickly done by me in Photoshop. Sorry if it's a little drunken with all of the angled delimiters, but we just wanted to give people an idea of what it might look like. Then we looked at the neighborhood bikeway as you got onto Dandridge and how it would change. And this is actually from Northcliffe Drive, but you can see that a lot of people thought I'd actually go, don't we already have that? Didn't you have a picture of that? And it's like, no, this is actually what it would look like.
I used to live on Northcliffe Drive.
Yep, and again, explain like why are we looking at these facilities now? And it's because it's in the priority bicycle plan. This is what it looks like on the maps of the plan where you see the facility change. The one thing that's different is rather than stopping the separated facility at the interstate, we would come through to Bunch Drive and probably look to get full stop control there to allow the two-way cycle track to exit safely. I put this picture in. The picture's from Columbus, Ohio, but we do have 4 transit stops along the way. I think it's the Route 22, correct me if I'm wrong, that goes through here. And we would have to make it ADA compliant, which means we would need to be able to have curb for the bus to kneel to. So we're looking at if that can fit, and Brandy is in the audience. She's been designing it, and it looks like we can make something work, at least in the interim.
That looks like a great location for one of those pop-up trees in a planter.
And then I wanted to address some of the issues, the biggest ones being sort of there has been historic underinvestment in parts of Raleigh, particularly in this area, and we do have some demographic issues that we want to deal with, and at least on the national level, we know that those demographics sometimes lead to different interests in what they want to get out of the facility. So fear of traffic collision is the top of everybody's list. But when we're working in communities of color, there are some additional concerns that have been identified nationally, and we wanted to go out and ask, are these things that we need to be paying attention to as we plan a facility? And again, we said, write it down on the comment cards. I told them I've got 4 kids and I've lost a lot of brain cells having to deal with that. So if you tell me, I won't remember, but if you write it down and get it to me, we're still waiting to see if any additional comment cards come back.
Are we doing any other ways of engaging with the community other than a CAC meeting?
Not yet. Again, this was very preliminary just to say, are we okay to proceed? We are looking at doing much more extensive outreach should we decide to proceed. And so far, at least, we're 50% of the way there based on the feedback we've got so far. Then we wanted to address what does the neighborhood get out of this? So you're getting this investment, what's the good? And a lot of it is just making it safer for all. There have been some issues with traffic calming here. Because this has already been passed by council, it's already on a council adopted plan. It doesn't have to go through the same process that a full traffic calming project would have to go through. Technically, it's already funded, at least to some degree, for doing the initial installation. So we can get this on the ground relatively quickly. And we've had complaints about traffic speeds from both the Wetland Center and a resident.
What's the speed limit right now?
It varies. It's 35. It's actually 45 under the interstate and goes back to 35, maybe even 25 on Dandridge.
Can we, in the effort of being holistic, drop the speed limit as part of this project?
That would be a likely recommendation.
Yeah. It doesn't always happen. That's why traffic calm roads that have the same speed limit still afterwards.
Yep. We talked about just initial access. This one is looking at employment density and sort of saying it gets folks across the interstate who maybe don't have a car. It gives them one more way to get up to some of the job centers. You can see the Wake Med on one corner. It's actually split between 2 different census geographies, which is why it looks strange, and then downtown. And you can also get there with transit. Right now, the 22 is the only bus that serves out there directly to the MLK corridor. We probably would stop the initial installation at Bragg because of a number of issues between Bragg and MLK, but the long-term plan is still to connect that last block. And that gets folks up to the new BRT installation. I don't know if there'll be a station directly adjacent, but again, there is going to be more frequency on that corridor. So what's next? Well, we're here tonight. We're going to be back out, provided we don't get canceled. I hear I'm the only thing on the agenda on the 23rd for South Central. So hopefully they will go ahead and proceed. I'll be as entertaining and brief as possible. If we are successful and we get good feedback, then we should be looking at doing something in the fall even potentially to have the initial kickoff and some kind of open house.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the feedback? And so this doesn't require a vote from the community, so just notification, is that correct? So that would go to, can we just make sure that it's going both to property owners and to residents in the case of renters?
I think so. Do we have a renter list? I know one of the departments had been keeping that at one
to the
time.
physical address,
Yeah.
where the physical address and the address and IMAPs deviate.
And one of the big advantages of State Street in particular is the fact that you basically got the women's prison
Yeah.
on one block south of Bragg, and then there's a long run of undeveloped swampland.
Yeah,
And
the
so,
wetland.
exactly right. So you have no driveway
There's not that
conflicts.
many,
From a
yeah.
two-way standpoint, it's
Great.
extremely ideal.
Gets you under 40.
Yeah, I was going to point out that corridor there has been overlooked and underserved for the community. I think that connecting it to the Walnut Creek, the Wetlands Center, the greenway that can then connects up to Chavis Park and that area. But going south, Dandridge, you can connect, you can get underneath the belt line without having to deal with an intersection. And the community south of there to Crosslink is a good community that definitely deserves a better service. There's a lot of pride of ownership. This is Biltmore Hills, for those of you that may not know it. And the fact that these two connect is sort of a secret passage in and out of the belt line that would be best used by cyclists for alternate ways to get it into downtown. I think it's a good project.
Have you chatted with Oaks and Spokes about the potential about doing a pop-up like we did on Harrington Street along this corridor? Would that be of interest in the neighborhood, or?
Depends on what I hear next Monday.
Okay. Absolutely.
But I like the idea. It sounds like fun.
Wonderful.
And again, just to keep things moving right along, the Crosstown Neighborhood Bikeway. This is one of the other priority projects in the plan. It's a parallel project to Wade Avenue. It essentially connects 5 points over to Ridge Road. And the maps that I passed out earlier give you some idea of the feedback. We actually did a ride through, kind of not really a ride audit, but just sort of went through and looked at some of the different options that we have. The big one is on the western side in particular, looking at using Grant and Leonard versus going down Churchill. There's a lot of steep hills. If you've ever driven on Wade Avenue or ridden on Wade Avenue, you know what that's about. And in fact, Church Hill is affectionately known as Church Hills in the bike community.
Huh.
So it does have some issues, but it also has some advantages. So to get into some of those very quickly, did I go backwards? I did. So looking at Churchill, these two pictures show that it's relatively wide. You can see there was a runner the day that I happened to be out there scouting the route. So there's pedestrians using it. It feels relatively safe. It has really good sight distances. In particular, the crossing at Dixie Trail, where you can see there's already flashing beacon, or not beacons, but there's just flashers out there. You can see the sight lines are pretty good. It's up at the top of a hill all the way around. And there are fewer stop signs, which on a bike, when you're trying to conserve momentum and not have to come to too many stops, especially when there's a hill on the other side you have to go up, is a nice thing. So Dixie and Leonard is shadier. It's a little more constrained. Some folks liked that. They felt like it made things feel a little slower. Some folks didn't. They felt like when there was oncoming traffic with parked cars on either side, there wasn't room enough for them and a bike. So that was somewhat mixed. The slopes on here are a little more forgiving. It's about 20 feet less climbing going westbound, and the steepest slope is around 11% versus a little tiny part of Churchill that actually clocks in at around 15%. The big thing though is Dixie. So every one of these pictures is the Dixie Avenue crossing, and you can see that it's at the bottom of a bowl. So everybody is coming down the hill with a head of steam, including bikes. The sight distances are not as good.
When you say Dixie Trail, you said Dixie Trail, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, when you say Dixie Trail crossing, what's the cross, is there a cross street you're referring to? Or?
Yeah, this one is with Leonard Street.
Oh, I don't know where that is. Okay. All right.
So again, talking about the grades, you can see that Churchill is a little less forgiving. So even though it's got the wideness and it's got fewer stop signs and a safer crossing at Dixie, the hills are a little less forgiving. You see Grant's only got the 1.4. I don't know if you can see at the bottom, that's clocking in down in here.
11.4%.
Yeah. Oberlin was an issue for everybody. And really there's sort of a east side and west side, and then there's Oberlin. There is an NCDOT project to replace the Wade Avenue Bridge, which is just south of here. There are some changes to where signals will be, which could limit our ability to put in any kind of PED signal like a hawk because of the proximity to the other signals. So we're kind of just waiting to see what happens with the bridge project, and also talking to them to see if there's a way to integrate the needs for this crossing as part of it. Right now it's still a discussion, but sort of channels are open and we're trying to see if we can make something work. On the eastern side, there are a lot of industrial trucks on Pershing, and they drop a lot of gravel, which isn't great, but there's also some pretty major destinations, particularly with the Neuse River and Nickel Point Brewing, that tend to attract a lot of bicyclists. The crossing at St. Mary's, depending on the time of day, can be an issue. Sometimes it's relatively quiet. So when I went to scout it at 3:30 in the afternoon, both times I didn't have any issues. When we went with the group at about 6:15 at night, we found it was a lot busier and was a little tricky for a group of 8 folks to get across all together. The gaps were a little trickier and some of the sight lines were not great. So we may actually need to look at some additional treatments getting across St. Mary's. And then the west end of Leonard back to the other side. The second time I did a recon, I wanted to ride them both together, and I ended up not riding Leonard because it was full of cars. I'm not sure what was going on, but there were cars stacked 12 and 15 deep trying to turn left onto Ridge Road. So that was the end of that. What I'm looking for from BPAC is no formal action, but if you have any direction on sort of where we need to fall for the final corridor we want to choose to do the markings and the wayfinding, if you have any additional insights, to please pass them along. We were sort of hoping that we would get enough feedback between the open house and the ride audit that we could definitively pick some corridors. We're still kind of dead even for the reasons that we noted in the presentation. So it's hard to just sort of put a foot down. I think as staff, my recommendation on the west side would be Churchill, because I think safety trumps some of the other things. Neither one of them is perfect, but from a safety aspect, I think it's sort of, if one is a 9, the other's a 10, they're both sort of where they need to be, but one's slightly better for the safety reason.
So I have some questions on, I know we're definitely putting signage up in this corridor. There are other best practices that can be utilized, as far as there are small roundabouts that can be installed. They cost more money to do something that's better. But where are we on the spectrum there? If we have a 10, level facility of what a crosstown bikeway would look like or a neighborhood bikeway would look like, or, where are we with that?
I'm not there yet. I have to pick a corridor.
Okay. But we will be open to different treatment options beyond just signage, or what's our budget look like?
We would have to balance that against some of the policy directions from the City Council relative to the traffic calming program, because what you're referring to specifically are major traffic calming elements, even though it's put a little circle in the middle of the street in a residential neighborhood.
Right.
Those are significant impacts that we would have to do a lot more public outreach and get community buy-in on making those changes, and it would have to be lined up that it's addressing a traffic issue. What we'd like to suggest at this point is that we move forward with the branding and marking elements of the corridor, and then if we determine that there are additional issues that require attention, that we come back and address that separately. Because again, our goal is to make this a branded bikeway, and we can cooperate with our traffic calming program to look at whether or not there are any known issues or documented speeding issues in some of these areas that would require that kind of countermeasure.
Sure.
But given some of the feedback from the City Council previously, there's going to have to be that type of correlation.
Okay. I hear that. I wonder, when you're talking about intersection treatments, when you said like on St. Mary's, we may have to do some different things here in order to create a safe crossing. Would that be paint? Would that be signage? Like, what would that be in order to alert folks that there is, if we're not going to do a physical modification to the built environment to slow down traffic, or how are we going to indicate that this is a bike corridor? Would it be paint, you think? Or is that not? What do you think?
Still working through that.
Okay.
Yeah, and
With-
it could, every intersection's probably a little different, and that's,
Sure.
once we nail down a corridor, we can start looking in detail at sort of where are their problem spots. I know when we went to cross at Harvey, where there's an existing signal, some of the things were just making sure that you lay down some kind of marking to let bikes know where they needed to place their wheel in order to set off the timer, or set off the signal.
Okay,
There's some simple things there, but folks who didn't know where to put your wheel didn't think that you could actually get the light to change for you. So
Right.
there was some education that happened as well.
sure. And the bike committee will continue to discuss some of the, perhaps the more nitty gritty. Is that, or will y'all proceed forward with staff? How will BPAC interface with this project going forward? Or are y'all ready to?
So I think, once we nail down a corridor, I think the next step from our end is to sit down internally with all of the different departments that, are you okay if we talk about speed reduction with people? Are you okay with certain elements? What are the things that you have a comfort level with?
Okay,
And then I think we'd be looking at another open house and saying, these are the final corridors that are chosen, and these are the kinds of treatments that you might see as we move forward. And then it would be a collaborative process with the neighborhoods and the engineering staff and traffic
Okay.
folks and the BPAC.
okay. Because the open house did show some renderings of different facilities that, were different treatment options. So I just want to make sure if we are telling folks that we are going to prescribe certain treatment options.
Right.
Okay,
But we would bring it to the full BPAC.
sure.
But right now, I just got to settle on a corridor. That is proving to
Sounds
be
good.
more
So
difficult
do you want us to
than,
make a vote on that?
not necessarily, unless you have strong feelings, and then I would be okay with that too.
How nice of you to set me up for my comment. Well, full disclosure, I live in this neighborhood, and my commute to work is Oberlin, Craig, Harvey, Acock. So
Perfect.
I think that you've picked a good route as you're recommended. I did want to stress that there is no really good sightline crossing on St. Mary's other than Craig, so that sort of eliminates everything else but that. I did want to add that I'm not quite sure how the Wade Avenue Oberlin intersection treatment might help or hurt this, but I do see that they've already started laying out some sidewalk improvements along Wade and Oberlin there. Now, that's about a block south of where you're having this crossing, so if that helps or not, I don't know.
Who's doing that?
That is a city-funded sidewalk project.
Okay.
Would it be possible to pair some separated bicycle facility prioritizations in the bike plan update that could help at places like Oberlin? Would that be something that's feasible, or do these need to be considered separately?
Well, right now, in working with the NCDOT team, the bike plan actually does call for separations at interchanges. So we are looking at a separated facility across the bridge, and however that would transition on either side. It doesn't quite come up to where we need it to. And again, it's facilitating movement along Oberlin and not necessarily across Oberlin.
Any additional feedback or thoughts? Well, I think we'll look forward to continuing to see how we can plug in via the subcommittee and additional, through the full commission.
And
This is great, though.
Appreciate Commissioner Neville's comments. If you do have those kinds of insights, that's very helpful.
So do you anticipate, I know it's hard to, this was a neighborhood bikeway project, and then we also discussed the one down by State Street. So we're kind of looking at these in conjunction right now. Is that how we're, or is there a
They're
prioritization for implementation?
Just moving parallel. The crosstown was queued up, just like the West Harrington, when I came in the door, and I've inherited it, and I'm trying to move it forward, and then the rest is dictated by the plan. There hopefully will be some additional projects that start to move, but again, it's sort of get these moving, get them to where they can be on autopilot, and then we'll start looking at the next batch.
Okay, great.
And some of them, particularly the separated ones, may be tied to BRT implementation.
Okay. So this was the, yeah. I just wanted to briefly, if we could, look over what the Walktober events are that are currently in the docket, and determine where we could augment it with BPAC support. A quick question, when we format this into the poster, can we put it in chronological order? Because right now it goes from the 2nd to the 14th to the 5th to the 6th to the 27th. We'll put that in. Okay, sweet. So staff will be assisting with the first two, but I'm sure if BPAC commissioners wanted to join y'all, they could just contact you offline about that? Or are you not looking for, you don't need extra commission support for, walk to school there, Martin Street Walk Safety Audit?
I'd
Either
say
way.
we welcome BPAC to attend, since this is something that BPAC is supporting and promoting, with it being BPAC's Walktober. I think it'd be good for commissioners to attend, but we do not need them leading those
Logistically?
events. Yeah.
Great. Okay.
And particularly the safety audit, if any commissioners are interested. So there is a state-sponsored project that's dealing with about 60 blocks of downtown,
6-0?
60,
Wow.
that's looking at pedestrian safety, essentially from the two squares all the way north to just north of Peace Street. And it goes not quite east to west. It goes from Harrington to Bloodworth. So we
Okay.
missed just those outer edges of the downtown grid. But what we're going to do is go ahead and take that exact methodology that they were using and try to do maybe a shorter one that looks at the next two streets to the south, which would be Martin and Davie, in that same corridor, and just expand what they already have and then contribute whatever data we have to that effort, and they can use it if they want.
Okay.
What's the end purpose of their study?
It's actually, there was a pedestrian fatality, and the governor's office actually got involved, and they have funded a study. There's a consultant that's come in. VHB is doing the work. They're looking at all of the behaviors. They're looking at infrastructure. They're looking at safety programs and outreach that they can do.
On a state level or in conjunction with the city?
They're actually in conjunction with the city, but they're looking at sort of what are the recommendations they can make, what are things they can communicate to their own employees. There's a lot of issues about employees going in and out of major parking areas to their place of employment in the state government complex. There's a lot of folks maybe not walking in designated areas, or maybe the designated areas are improperly placed. There's a number of issues, and this audit was to try and get a handle on some of that.
That's really interesting. I wonder, is this an opportunity for us to mention, like, there are issues with parking on certain corridors that are very tight to pedestrian walkways that really reduce visibility? Is this an opportunity to bring up the
Some of that
opportunity
came
to
up,
improve?
some of that came up in the audit, in terms of like where there were issues.
Who is,
with
so
warnings and-
VHB is conducting these audits?
They are. And ultimately, this is a pilot that the state wants to roll out to state campuses all over the state. So
Okay.
they want to use this as a model, and it will be rolling out to colleges and other
Great.
state complexes in other parts of North Carolina.
And you've been a stakeholder in that process?
Correct.
Okay.
Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe they're putting out an app as well to the public that should be coming soon for people to add additional
Interesting.
information into their study. We can share that with you when it becomes available.
It sounds a little redundant if you're getting to like app level with like, but that's good that they have that level of interest in it. But I'm glad to hear that they've been looping you in to ensure that like synergies where they're identified.
The recommendations are on city streets.
Right,
Yeah. And a lot of the app was actually,
right.
sorry, they wanted to get origin and destination and sort of how people were making their trips. So they wanted to look at what parking deck are you leaving from and what building are you going to, and are you using the crosswalks? And they're asking folks to volunteer to be a part of the program. And then part of that is if you see things that you don't like, or if you have a near miss, can you go ahead and report it through the app? And it'll
Assuming that they're working closely with the state parking office. I have both a husband that's a state employee and worked with the state when they were doing their wayfinding for their parking decks, and they're all assigned, right? There's a mega database somewhere that could tell you much of that information.
There are multiple state agencies that are involved in this effort.
Yeah, absolutely. Great.
And it's interesting to me that one pedestrian death set that spiral off for the state, because we have a lot of pedestrian fatalities that occur on a city level, and we, obviously lack resources but what if we took some top 3 best practices from this process, and we are through doing this Martin Street, thank you for doing that, but it also, they should get kudos for trying to rectify an issue. So I think that, that's great. Okay, should we pivot to Walktober?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, we were on it and we got distracted. Okay, so annual historic church walk. This is on Saturday, October 5th. I know Rebecca is also, currently a commission member that I think would, as the leader of the outreach committee, I think she'll be interested in assisting with some of these as well. Is there anybody who, and do we need to nail it down right now? I mean, because this is September. Yeah.
As soon as possible.
As far as-
This is what communication is waiting on in order to make the poster.
So.
And we're running out of runway to have the poster.
Right.
in time.
So my question, and this is a question for the outreach committee, is what, in the past, I remember we had somebody had coordinated a walk specifically, like if you were the lead from BPAC, you had kind of routed out a map. Do you know the status of that for these, or would that be something that the BPAC member would have to still pursue?
I think the BPAC member would need to coordinate with the city and the staff who, some of these are being led by staff. So that's not.
But like the annual historic church walk, do you know?
So that has a map already put together.
Okay.
This is an event that is already occurring.
Okay.
It's being coordinated by an outside group, whoever oversees the churches in downtown.
Okay.
They have a map already in place.
And an existing event? Okay, so this is just something that a BPAC member would attend
Probably
coordination.
It's supposed to be a self-guided tour, so I think the idea is like a BPAC member would meet people and walk with them through the tour on the map that already exists.
Okay. All right, and then there's also the Explore Dix Park one. So we're gonna need to find a few members who are willing to, I mean, do you want to all check our calendars right now to see if we're available? I'm sure I can help with one or two of these.
While you're looking, Paul, you're leading the Martin Street Walk, is that correct? That's a lunchtime walk. Every other one is a weekend.
Right.
Well, it's the exception walk to school day, sorry.
And then
The Martin Street Walk.
Rebecca is taking on
Okay.
the Oakwood
Yeah.
Cemetery tour.
That's October 1st, is that, what about, October 6th, okay. 1 PM.
Yeah, we're looking at October 5th and October 6th are ones that still need folks. I think I should be able to do the October 6th Dix Park guided walking tour. And then I will just need to, my question here is, it sounds like Dorothea Dix already has a individual that, or a programmed event that we are working in coordination with. So would I follow up then with somebody that, I guess I'll just ask Rebecca, but I have not been involved in the planning process this year, so I don't know the status of people being reached out to as far as coordination is involved. So that's my kind of question mark in my head.
Yeah, I think, and forgive me, I've only kind of half in the know. B is the person that's mainly been coordinating this is because the outreach committee wasn't able to finalize this as much as possible.
Right.
A lot of this year's, in order to have a Walktober, was kind of just piggybacking off of existing events.
Okay.
But what our communications department feels is that we can't really put it on our poster and say it's part of BPAC's Walktober unless BPAC is actually there
Sure.
in some way. Otherwise,
Fair
it's
enough.
just a Dix Park
Right,
event,
of course.
if that makes sense.
Yes, and yeah, I think that it's good to promote existing activities that are already occurring, and that's kind of what we had gotten to. And it really, it's just we're gonna have to decide from a commission and staff level, I think the Walk to School Day is a great opportunity for the staff to plug in and do, an external facing event. I think that because I know that folks have been kind of wondering why there isn't the same amount of activity as Bike Month, and I think that last month we discussed a little bit how Oaks and Spokes does some of that coordination. So I think that has led to some, partnerships being formed. So does anybody want to assist with the annual historic church walk and show up for that? Paul or Nick? I'm looking at my outreach committee.
Sign me up.
All right, Nick, we're putting you to it. Hey, man, if I'm chilling out on Saturday, I will come and I'll do it with you.
See you there.
And all the church friends. Okay, so is this ready to go for poster?
Mary,
Yes.
I'm interested in October the 14th for Martin Street.
All right, I'm interested in that one too. So you might get a few of us.
Yeah, I do have a previous event going on, but it's ongoing anyway.
All right,
So I'll just
you'll make some time
make
for
sure that
us.
things are done, and I'll meet.
All right, we're holding you to it. Okay, so I did notice there is a spelling error on Dorothea Dix Park at the, I don't know if you are looking for that level of proofing right now.
Yeah,
But-
those sidewalks are right up our alley, so.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Do you all need anything else from us to proceed forward? Okay, I'm sorry that took longer than usual this time, and we will make sure to be more proactive next year.
I guess if anyone wants to, we'll still go through for spelling, but just the general summaries of each one, if anyone has any comments, because this is what communications will take and kind of copy into the poster that they make.
I mean, I wouldn't analysis paralysis it too much. Looks good to me, but if
It
others have
fills the
thoughts.
page.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay. Any announcements, board comments, I'm sorry. Anybody got board comments? I wanted to say thank you publicly to the Go Raleigh staff that came today to our subcommittee meeting. I mean, Mila brought like all her friends, or 10 people or so in the room that came to talk with us about this plan. And it really, I mean, I told them I'm making them cupcakes next time because I was so impressed, and I wanted to publicly thank them for that. Any other board comments? Okay, upcoming events.
I do have an announcement. Interesting anniversary celebrations being held by Campbell University Law School. They're celebrating their 40th year being at the Buies Creek campus and the 10th year of being in the downtown Raleigh campus. So to celebrate that, they're doing something called a 1040 bike ride, where you can ride your bike from Buies Creek here, or you can go out 10 miles at Lake Benson, I think it's White Deer Park, and ride 10 miles in. And all those routes will coincide down at the downtown campus, and there'll be a lunchtime barbecue. So that's basically Saturday, September 28th. They leave Buies Creek at 8 a.m., and they go through White Deer Park at 9:30, and then there's a post-ride lunch. So that's something unique and different and being done for the very first time.
Great.
I have an event to announce. Jennifer Delcourt, she is the, I'd have to check my notes to
Safe Routes to School
Safe Routes
coordinator.
to School coordinator. She is going to be putting on and coordinating a Learn to Ride program on Saturday, November 16th from 10 to 12, and it's going to be open to children that want to learn how to ride. And they're looking for volunteers to help out. You would have to show up at around 8 o'clock if you wanted to volunteer, and there would be a volunteer training. And if you don't want to volunteer, put the word out. Let everybody know. We had told her that we're not the best at marketing, but we would be happy to
If
get it on,
October's any indicator on our,
to get it out on the public, on the agenda and in the public record, and we will do our best individually to try to share the information.
she didn't mention an age range, did she?
I don't believe she did, no.
I think he said they were targeting K through 8, but open to everybody.
Thank you. Eyes and ears.
And we are in the process of trying to get a certified bike league instructor in to teach an LCI class, which would get additional instructors in the region certified. It'll probably be in the spring if we're able to put it together, but we will need at least 8 people taking the class. They will have already had to have been through the Cycling 101 class. So if you know folks that are interested in getting their league certification, we are looking to sort of just gauge interest at this point.
Are you going to hold a 101 class earlier than then?
We're looking at that. The last one we held was 2 years ago. I'm trying to remember where that was, at the Walnut Creek Wetland Center. It was pretty well attended. There were a number of folks who went who have not gotten their LCI yet, and we're going to make sure to reach out to them in particular. Some of them work for some of the other towns nearby. And then just if there's a general call for folks. That's a little easier to put together, though, because we don't have to go as far afield to bring in an instructor for that.
Sure. Okay,
There are local instructors qualified to teach that already.
right. Sounds good.
One other item, at your last meeting, we pointed out the fact that October, it represents the 10th anniversary of the establishment of the BPAC. And we had suggested looking at holding a social for inviting back all previous members of the commission. We wanted to fill you out as far as whether or not you wanted to plan that in conjunction with your next meeting, which is Monday, October 21st. And say, for example, set a time after that meeting to have get together, or if you want to look at a separate date.
Yeah, that's tricky because sometimes we can be too verbose and then we get too long. So if we like set it for, but it would help us like
Have a deadline.
stay to it. I like it. That's good for me.
But
Maybe.
we have on the docket for next month, we'll have Jason back.
Thank you for grounding me.
And it's okay. Is the downtown plan coming? Thinking of ways I get verbose.
I mean, we don't know for sure yet what is coming. The staff would be the best to say with the most clarity, I think, for the agenda for next month.
And we can help you tailor that with a deadline in mind.
Eric's motivated. Hey, I appreciate that. All right,
So we saying that we're gonna have it after our
that's what we
meeting?
were thinking, just carry the party
Just
over.
Maybe just have
We're gonna
the
have to
meeting
walk there,
shorter.
guys.
An hour, hour and a half.
We'll do a little audit on the way.
Well,
Or ride our bicycles.
we're gonna have what, steak and,
You're treating, right?
oh,
Okay, I
Sure.
like that idea.
awesome.
7:30?
7:30?
Would that be
Yeah.
realistic?
It's
That would
7:30
be,
right now, so,
yeah, that would be a
let's
good goal. I don't like going to 8, I hate that.
yeah. and a-
7:30,
Very good, thank you.
okay.
And a big cake with a bicycle and a sidewalk on it.
Okay, we're making plans over here. Okay, is that everything for upcoming events? Okay. Confirmation of next BPAC meeting was already mentioned, October 21st at 6 PM, with a party afterwards, apparently.
Now, so we can eat in this chamber?
Oh, no, we going somewhere else, or
We'll
we
be
can,
offsite.
Oh.
we are not staying
oh,
here.
going somewhere else, okay, I was wondering.
Yeah. We're having a legit party. Okay, with that, adjourned, right?
Thank you.